Joining me now to discuss all of this is Jenna Ellis. Jenna is the Director of Public Policy for the James Dobson Family Institute. She is also a constitutional law attorney and a former prosecutor. Jenna, great to see you.
Thank you for having me, Monica.
You bet. So, as you heard, the president just ordered the declassification and the unredaction of these documents. This is going to be a sweeping disclosure. What do you expect we might see?
Well, I think it's very wise of him to do that from a constitutional standpoint. Of course, he has the authority to unilaterally declassify. And I think what we're going to see from these documents is how deep the collusion among the Democrats really were to stop his presidency, to stop his campaign in 2016. And we're going to see that he was right all along, that this was more of a deep state effort to stall his campaign. And what we're not going to find is that there was any evidence of Russian collusion. And I think this is going to have a severe impact on the Mueller investigation, as it should. And Monica, really all of these stories together, whether it's Kavanaugh, the FISA court, the Russia collusion story, Mueller, all of these things all together should emphasize to the American people that we need to be truth seekers. And that's really what is not happening among the Democratic Party today, is that they're not seeking truth. They're seeking political outcomes and political tactics in order to get there. And so for the FISA documents in particular, we are going to see the truth.
Well, and you know, you mentioned the Democrats on the left. They're certainly not interested in the truth, but unfortunately neither is the mainstream media in this country either, who are serving as the wingmen for those forces. Let's talk a little bit, Jenna, about specifically what we might see, because I'm hearing from a number of very good sources that these documents contain exculpatory information about Carter Page, who was the original target of the FISA warrant, George Papadopoulos, and in fact the President of the United States. And that exculpatory information was actually withheld from the FISA court.
And that's entirely possible. I mean, remember that often in a very similar way in law enforcement in criminal investigations, where you have law enforcement going to get an affidavit in support of warrantless arrest, for example, and they give the information to the judge that will determine whether or not an arrest warrant, a search warrant, those types of things are in place. And unfortunately, there are instances where law enforcement will either outright lie, or they will they'll encourage and kind of exaggerate some of the evidence. And when you actually get to it and a defense attorney has the opportunity to go back through that affidavit and point out those inconsistencies, then it does become exculpatory, and it does show that there are sometimes biases in order to obtain that warrant. That is not how our justice system and our law enforcement is supposed to work. That is not how the FISA court was designed to be set up. This was supposed to make sure that the intelligence and the spy communities and the surveillance for the United States remained to have integrity and to make sure that we have security in our national surveillance operations. This is not designed to be a political target of a campaign that one side doesn't want to move forward. That's not furthering truth. That's not what the FISA court was designed to do.
That's right. And that's why the FISA court is supposed to be secret, because it's supposed to do what you were just outlining. And it may be that these documents show that the only collusion was on the part of the DOJ and FBI and perhaps others to defraud that court. Let me ask you specifically, Jenna, about a couple of big names who had served in the Obama administration, and some of whom are still there in high levels of the DOJ, with respect to the FISA warrants. Sally Yates, then Deputy Attorney General, later Acting Attorney General for a short period of time in the Trump administration. She signed one of the FISA warrants. Rod Rosenstein, who became Deputy Attorney General, he signed the last FISA warrant. He's still in there. And there's already a grand jury in place investigating Andrew McCabe. These three people, I mean, if they're implicated in these documents, what does that mean?
Well, it depends on what we actually find, but I think there is a very strong likelihood that, particularly with Yates and McCabe, that they may be implicated in and potentially indicted or have other charges that come about potentially for perjury. I mean, you have to sign those types of affidavits under penalty of perjury. You have to say that you are knowingly putting forth the truth and your knowledge as to at that point. This is not supposed to be a political target to advance a special interest. And that's what the FISA court has become. And so particularly, I think with those two individuals specifically, they're probably very concerned that the president is now declassifying these and releasing these. And it just shows that President Trump has been full of integrity all along by saying he had nothing to do with collusion. This has been a witch hunt, his words, from the beginning, and that the American people should be able to have confidence in our law enforcement that they are not politically biased and motivated like what we saw from Strzok and Page, but rather that they are doing and bringing about the interests of justice. That's clearly not what happened here.
Let me ask you specifically about James Comey, the former FBI director, and Loretta Lynch, the former attorney general. Is it at all possible, Jenna, that all of these machinations were going on, FISA warrants, etc., and the head of the department and the attorney general did not know about it?
That's highly, highly unlikely. And I think that we're going to continue to see evidence that shows the opposite of that, and particularly what's already on the record. I think it's safe to say that that is very, very unlikely, especially because these are two of the top law enforcement agents who have control over their particular agencies. And I just don't think that that's possible. I mean, even in a very small state unit like a district attorney's office, the lead prosecutors there, they understand what's going on even at a very, very low level. That's just really highly unlikely.
And also, I think there's an outstanding question as to what the then president of the United States, Barack Obama, may have known. But that's a question for a different day. Final question for you, Jenna, before I let you go. You mentioned the Mueller investigation. Once all of this information is released, and assuming it shows what we suspect it will show, which is deep corruption at the highest levels here, what do you think it does to the Mueller probe?
Well, I've been saying for months now that Mueller should close the investigation and should say there is no evidence whatsoever of any collusion, but we don't even know really the scope of his investigation. If his scope allows him to proceed against potentially some of these other deep state people, those types of indictments should be handed down. A prosecutor should always have a higher calling to be in the interests of justice and the truth wherever that evidence leads. It should not be biased, again, against one political party or another. And we see that double standard even within the context of that investigation. And it's simply undermining the American family and the American people's trust in our law enforcement. And that's really regrettable.
Well, we'll see what happens with the Mueller investigation once these documents are finally released. Jenna Ellis, the Director of Public Policy for the James Dobson Family Institute and former federal prosecutor. Jenna, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Pleasure.